Hey guys, welcome to What's the Topic, and today we're continuing our most haunted places in each continent series. For this video, we'll be discussing South America, but before we get started, make sure you go check out our first video of this series that'll be linked in the description and at the end of the video. Starting off, we got the Vampire of PISCO in Peru. The port town of Pisco bears the name of Peru's national spirit and also holds the chilling myth of a vampire in its history. According to legend, an English woman by the name of Sarah Ellen Roberts was charged as a vampire, murderer, and witch. In an elaboration of the story, Sarah was said to be one of Dracula's brides. After her death, the Church of England refused her burial in consecrated ground. So her husband, John Roberts, traveled the world trying to find a place to bury his wife. The small Peruvian town of Pisco was the only place to accept her body. Sarah swore before her death in 1913 that she would rise from the dead and take vengeance in 80 years. But nothing out of the ordinary happened in Pisco when 1993 rolled around. However, a deadly earthquake shook the town in 2007, and her grave was mysteriously one of the only few tombs that were left untouched. To this day, citizens claim to see a ghostly woman wander the town's dusty streets at night. So if you decide to visit Pisco, make sure you give Sarah a visit. But be polite unless you want to be haunted. Next up, we got the Joelma building in Brazil. The Joelma building's 25 stories tall in Sao Paulo and is known for the tragic events that happened on February 1, 1974. On the morning of that fateful day, an air conditioning unit short-circuited on the 12th floor, and within 20 minutes, the entire building was engulfed in flames. The primary cause of the fire's rapid spread was the interior's flammable furniture and building materials that quickly ignited. By the time the fire department arrived, they'd realized their ladders could only reach up to the 15th floor, trapping everyone above in the inferno. A total of 179 people perished that day, many of them jumping to their deaths out of desperation. The fire department also found 13 bodies inside one of the building's elevators, all of which were so horrifically burned that they remain identified today. The 13 are now buried in the nearby São Pedro Cemetery, where people regularly hear screams, voices, and moans of agony coming from the unidentified graves. According to legend, the Joelma building was constructed on the same land as the 1948 home of Paulo Camargo. He was a young chemistry professor who had a mother with cancer who was always in the hospital, and throughout all the hospital visits, he would meet a nurse that he fell in love with. His family disapproved and kept driving him into a dark enough place where he would end up shooting them all in their home, and buried them in a well he had recently dug in the backyard. The police eventually came to investigate the women's disappearances, and Paulo took his own life before confessing to his crimes. It's believed that the Joelma building's haunted by the spirits of those lost in the fire, but also the troubled chemist and his murdered family. Next up is Colombia del Salto Hotel. If you want to see a creepy building, this is the place to go. It also has its own set of local ghosts and legends. The impressive house was built in 1923 as a residential mansion located on the edge of a cliff just opposite of Tequendama Forms in Bogota, Colombia. In the late 1920s, it was converted into a luxury hotel for the wealthy. By 1950, plans were in place to convert it into a much larger hotel. But with the population and industry in the area growing, the hotel was unable to be converted. In the early 1990s, the river next to the hotel was reported to be polluted to the point where it began to give off a terrible odor. Soon after, the structure was cleaned inside and out. Rumors began to circulate that the hotel was riddled with paranormal activity. Personal belongings and notes were frequently found in the area that say to be left by the unfortunate souls of those who chose to end their lives by jumping off the edge of the cliff near the house. According to local legend, the indigenous Marisca Indians used the location to avoid being captured by Spanish conquerors during the conquest of South America. The hotel believes the ghosts are former building patrons who would occasionally get into bar fights, and the loser would fall to his death and never be seen again. Today, you can visit the building, which has been converted into a museum named the Tequendama Falls Museum. But be aware that some believe the building's still cursed and will never escape its tragic past. Last but not least, we have the PISCO and AlBERTI stations in Argentina, having been completed in 1913. It's the oldest subway station in Latin America. Back then, building the line was an enormous task that claimed the lives of several workers. Two of the most prominent casualties were Italian immigrants Salvador Vaca and Antonio Salas, whose deaths were initially covered up as accidents before being revealed as the result of negligence. It's believed that both of their spirits, as well as the other ill-fated construction workers, roam the tracks at night, with several people reporting the sound of footsteps during after hours and the reflections of tired faces flashing past windows as trains zoom down the A-line. Now that's super creepy if you ask me. The haunted subway line are now partial half stations because they only operate in one direction rather than their intended two, aka phantom lines, many of which do not appreciate being disturbed. Workers have claimed that something turns off security cameras at night, only to see these white figures menacingly staring back at them when they switch the cameras back on. A phantom bride also roams the tunnels of PISCO and AlBERTI stations in her white gown, leaving people to believe she was left at the altar or threw herself onto the tracks on the day of her wedding. This is by far the most haunted place I've ever heard about. What do you guys think? Let us know down in the comments.